All right.
Bright lights.
Bright lights. Fantastic. After lunch, always a perfect time to chat. Well, listen, thank you all for taking the time to spend with us today to talk about GenAI and private equity. First of all, I'd like to thank all of you for taking the time to spend with us today. And it's been great catching up with a number of you that I'm seeing in the audience and meeting some of you for the first time. And also like to thank AWS for just hosting such a wonderful conference. It's been fantastic to date, and look forward to what comes next. We've heard a lot about the expectations of AI. We're talking about this every moment of the day. And one of the great things about being in the private equity sector is we get to see firsthand on a regular basis, cross-industry, what's real, what's not. And so what we want to do today is talk a little bit, not about the hype, not about the theory of AI, but the practical lived experiences of those who are actually dealing with this on a regular basis. And we've got leaders here today that come at it from different perspectives, whether it's from as an operator in a private equity, as a CTO, a CPO in a portfolio company having to actually manifest and create change, whether it be AWS, who's leading the charge in so many of these areas, or Nate Barnes, who's spending a ton of his time as our lead data scientist helping to transform private equities. So before we begin, let's introduce us and think of questions as you go through, because we'll be asking some questions to the panel, but we want to get questions from each of you in the audience. So some background real quickly on me. My name is Sanjay Subramanian. I'm a partner in PwC. I lead a lot of our alliances and our cloud data and AI and engineering business. And I work alongside a number of my colleagues in the private equity space predominantly, and have had the pleasure of experiencing a lot of the ups and downs of that journey over the last few years. Next to me, we have Chai, who's at Warburg Pincus, operating partner, who joined Warburg Pincus with deep analytical capability, deep AI experience over the years, and whose job it is to help transform the portcos under his supervision and transform how Warburg Pincus as an entity thinks about embedding AI into how it does its work day to day. We have Ravi, who sits there, who's sitting next to me, who is a CTO and CPO of Abrigo, a Carlyle portco, who's really had to live day to day on how to manifest change within his organization. And you'll hear from him about the successes and also some of the struggles along the way, and some recommendations for the rest of us in terms of what success looks like, but also areas where we should avoid, right? We have Chad Bernick, Principal Solutions Architect for AWS in the PE space, who's been spending a ton of time working with hundreds, if not thousands, of different PE clients and portfolio companies in helping them transform. And last but not least, we've got Nate Barnes, who's the Chief Data Scientist for PwC's Deals practice. He sits in our value creation team and has really been helping both diligence companies from a sell-side and a buy-side perspective and the impact of AI on that thesis, but also helping companies transform throughout their portfolio. So with that said, let's go on to this discussion. So what was interesting was, it was only a few days ago, I think it was November 30th, which was the third anniversary of the ChatGPT being released. And I remember that time, we all remember that time, there was a lot of excitement. Everyone was talking about the change that could happen, would happen. But the four of you have had actually lived experiences of what actually happened. But I want to maybe go back to that moment. Right, and Chai, can you just maybe start with you? What were sort of your expectations? What were you thinking at that time?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I think at least at Warburg Pincus, there's a lot of attention on these technologies, primarily from investing angle. So didn't come out as surprise at that moment because ChatGPT was always like, this is a foundation models, LLMs are going to be big things, so we need to monitor. So there was a lot of monitoring being done. But what was surprised is that, the growth and the pace at which we've seen adoption, right? So that was actually something I think we didn't really, grasp it. So, and as expected, a lot of questions being asked everywhere. So does it impact our portfolio? Do we need to reinvent our, due diligence process? Does it actually change our investment theme? So a lot of questions and maybe less clarity, to be very honest. But I think few things that we did right at that time was, we said, what, let's have a targeted focus, both on the internal side. We set up a small teams to start really thinking, should we be using that tool? What does it really mean? We started really looking at our investment thesis that we have been writing, and should we start incorporating AI as one of the elements of this? We'll talk in a bit actually how it has changed, but we slowly started asking maybe 2-3 questions. So every time a deal gets presented, everybody's asked, like, oh, does ChatGPT has an impact? Don't know about it, but curious, right? So they're all just curious. And at the same time, on the portfolio side, right? So fortunately, we didn't have any direct businesses which will directly get impacted. But we did know that software as a world will evolve. We didn't know what to do about it. So the first thing we did is we looked at our software portfolio and called the top CEOs and said, what, guys, at least keep in mind, right? So we don't know where it goes, but this is something we should talk about it in the future, right? At least a lot of questions, but we did a more thoughtful approach to pick few areas and started having those questions raised at least. And started thinking about where to focus on,
Excellent, thank you. So Ravi, how about from you? I mean, you had a roadmap before that moment, and then how did that change for you, and what was that journey like for you?
Has it been only 3 years? It feels like 10 years. The evolution, the technologies that have come to the surface. So before I get to that question, just briefly what we do in the banking space. We serve over 2,400 or 2,500 banks and credit unions in the US, and most of them are community banks and credit unions. So think of us, right, as Abrigo, we are their innovation partner, right? So our goal is to try to stay ahead because they don't have the budgets that the JP Morgans and the Bank of Americas have, right? Spending billions and billions of dollars on technology and innovation. So we act as that innovation partner for all of these banks, right, that are around the corner. So when ChatGPT came to the surface, there was a lot of initial awe and excitement, right? What does this mean, right? So we have a small advisory practice within our company, and part of that, part of the capabilities that they offer is understanding what types of updates FFIEC is making or what's happening in BSA space, right? Well, now you can actually upload the document and ask the questions, right, within ChatGPT. So you could already see the writing on the wall. There's going to be some level of disruption, but in the initial excitement and awe, it's more about, okay, what can we do with this technology, right? And we started deploying it internally, which is, again, for us as a technology company in a very regulated space, we take a good hard look before we roll out any new technology onto our employees even, right? So it took a little bit of conversation and debate internally because we were talking about early 2023, right? We've just seen ChatGPT hit the market, and within 2 or 3 months, you have 30 million users, right? Consumers, including ourselves. So that's when we started to see the potential of the technology, and very quickly, our teams, again, we are in the workflow space, intelligent workflows, whether it's fraud detection, anti-money laundering, loan origination workflows. So there's a lot of areas where you have to narrate what's happening. It could be a fraud alert, or it could be a loan or a credit memo, right? So people have to write things word by word. And our product managers started to see, well, could we actually use this technology to start writing memos in a quicker fashion, right? If they spend 30 minutes today, could we give them a quick start that brings that down to 10 minutes? So those were the types of initial ideas that we went after, and then it very quickly took off, and we started engaging with Nate and started building more complicated workflows that, again, in the regulated space, you have to think about a lot of other things that we can talk through as well. So.
Excellent. So, and Chad, you were getting all these requests at that time, right? When you look back, what were sort of some of these, where do people want to start? And if you look back, what were some of the misconceptions people had?
Yeah, when we got started, people in portfolio companies across private equity were very excited once ChatGPT came out, looking for ways to create value. And I'll say, pretty much everybody followed the same patterns. We tried to create customer-facing chatbots. Everybody wanted one since we saw what ChatGPT had. They quickly moved to, let's look at doing some summarization, particularly in the private equity space, summarizing what's in the data room, summarizing financial statements, trying to look for, is this a good investment or is it not a good investment, and can the tools really do that for me? We saw a lot of people wanting to take their knowledge bases and extend it into that space. And the interesting thing with all of that is they ran into a lot of challenges thinking that the chat GPTs and custom GPTs that we were working on could understand all of their kind of less than structured, less than pretty data, and then it would just figure it out and they would get value with kind of those messy scenarios. And things just didn't quite pan out for them as they were exploring those scenarios. But in the efforts that we were doing, we were trying to help these firms have their aha moment that this can be a really valuable tool. So one of the things that we pushed back on a little bit was, rather than explore the technology for technology's sake and that, oh my gosh, we need to move fast, is let's look at some real high friction points inside your business and look at how we could potentially use AI to solve some of those. And Nate and I were talking before this. It's like, what are some of the things that actually made it into production? And I go, believe it or not, it was the things that didn't conform to the patterns of what everybody else was trying that we solved. There was those novel use cases. And one of them was, I can't say that it went to production, but it solved a real business need. We had one customer with a catalog of images that they were looking to put on their e-commerce platform. And they wanted to enrich that data set. And it was a very large data set of images. And they wanted to have the multiple side views and back views and three-dimensional images, and hey, can we see that, what it would look like, this couch in my house, and those sort of things. And we used AI at the time to go through and take all of the data that they have and then have it reimagine and build the synthetic images and pictures that they wanted to complete for their catalog. And it did a fantastic job. So rather than having this super high friction problem where you're going through and taking new photos, and you have to have a team that goes and processes the photos, and then get them uploaded and make sure they were compliant and the right sizing, everything for all the different e-commerce platforms and places it was going to be listed. We used AI to do all of that, and in a fraction of time, it ripped through it and solved what was a real high-friction problem for a customer, but it was a one-off problem. But doing those sort of things with customers really started to turn the light bulb on. This isn't as neat as the technology is. Maybe it's not so much a technology problem, because people have this technology solution trying to go out there and find things to solve with it. Maybe this is more, we should be thinking about high friction workflows and problems in the business and take a business lens to it. And so we always were pushing back and walking back and saying, let's not talk about the technology. Talk to me about your challenges and things that you want to solve for. This is more of a business problem, a workflow problem, than it is a neat technology solution looking for problems. And taking that approach, our customer base really had a lot more success taking these AI tools into production and moving forward with them, and still working with us to accelerate what their business is doing and deliver value across the portfolio.
Thank you. So Nate, looking back, there was a lot of excitement around use cases, and think about the number of conversations I'm sure you've been involved in. When you look back, what sort of distinguishes, those use cases, to follow on from Chad, that sort of resulted in successful implementation, and those that sort of stalled at that sort of POC stage?
Yeah, and I wanted to come back to a couple of things here, because just the original tee-up was like, what are all these PE portcos end up doing? And I think two things I saw, there's so much attractive stuff in the market around consumer AI that we see in social media or elsewhere, and it's hard to not get distracted by that. Mm-hmm. So there's thousands of things you can do with AI, but back to Chad's point, it's like, at the end of the day, AI for AI's sake or AI for IT's sake isn't really going to work. You've got to start with a business problem. I think that there are some archetypes that kind of emerged, and to me, the big takeaway I thought was those people that prioritized had success, right? Like, how do you prioritize what to focus on, and what is a business problem where there's a high degree of friction, where there's a lot of value to extract? And the other thing is just getting started with it, right? Understanding that you need to experiment and move quickly. And like you think about what Abrigo did, and you guys did some experimentation really early on. Not all of it worked, I don't imagine, right? But the idea is that you get in there and you've got to experiment fast where it really matters, which was kind of your customer base, and understanding, how you can inject AI into credit memos or alert dispositions, wherever that might be. But in terms of like what drove them to success, like what was the differentiating factor that made a POC go to production or become realized? Ravi might have perspectives on it too, but like to me it was those that started with a business value prop in mind up front, right? Like too many businesses gave their AI problems to the IT people and said, oh, these guys understand what that is, and didn't think about transforming their business or thinking about the value in their business first. And so whenever we enter into any of these conversations, we start with value. We say, where is there complexity in your business that's preventing you from either growing your business into new customer bases or expanding upon customers or new markets, or taking out costs, right? Like, do you have a bunch of people that are sitting around processing documents? But these are value questions and not AI questions. So I think that's the biggest gating factor, I think, in the successes we saw, is like those that started with AI for value as opposed to AI for AI's sake.
So maybe just if I can ask you, Ravi, on this, because I've seen multiple different approaches, right? One approach is let's give everyone access to something, and we're really proud as a company because we announced the number of people that have run a session, and that shows that we're AI enabled, right? But you took a different approach. You guys were very focused on key business issues. What made you sort of take? What made you take that strategy?
Yeah, I think to Nate's point and the question that you're leaning into there, you should always start with the customer, right? End of the day, AI could be very, very transformative, but AI as a technology or a hammer looking for a nail, that doesn't work, right? I mean, we have seen that again and again over the last 25, 30 years with some of the technology waves that we've seen. So what we've done at Abrigo, again, if you take a specific product set, right, like loan origination as an example, about 1,000 customers use us for loan origination, 1,000 banks and credit unions. So what that allows us to do is see how they've implemented the workflows. For example, if you take a community bank, $2 to $5 billion asset bank, they would have anywhere from 5 to 15 people that touch a loan application, right? From inception, from a relationship manager, creating a lead, all the way to that loan getting approved or some decision made on it, right? So that's 5 to 15 people, right? So what the systems that we have and the usage analytics and the data that we have allows us to see is where exactly are they spending time within the application, that is a friction point, and where are they spending time outside the system, right? And how do we bring them on to the flow that we've created, and how do we remove that friction, right, as you go through it? Like, oh, they spend, again, 15 minutes, 20 minutes creating a credit memo. Can we give them a better start? So you save another 10 minutes. Again, our mission at Abrigo, again, this sounds like a sales pitch, right, to maybe there's no banks here, so it's not very useful. Our mission is to help the community banks, right, be very efficient, and yes, it helps them increase their net interest margins and all of the goodness that comes along with it. But truly, if you think about a community, right, or a community bank, it's built on relationships, right? They know what the local business coffee shop's doing, right? And how do they make them successful? Is there a capital need coming up that they need to help them bridge? So those are the unique insights that they have because of the relationships, right? So if we can save 10 minutes from them doing the undifferentiated work, the grunt work in the system, and have them spend time in building and nurturing that relationship and know their customers better, right? That's a win, right? That is our mission. So every time we look at these workflows, and having the scale allows us to see where they're spending the time and how do we save a few minutes here, a few minutes there. It doesn't need to, when people talk about, oh, that role's going away, there is no credit analyst, there is no credit underwriter, right? Go do something else. Well, yeah, maybe there's a path in the future to that, but there's there's a time in between where you don't want to completely disrupt, right? A workflow that's been around for 30 years, right? So what does that journey look like, and how do we give them the power of AI without pushing them to reimagine the entire workflow, right, is what we have done.
Yeah. So, Chai, a question for you then. When you look at your portfolio, you look back in time, what is, just your perspective in terms of how do you know the ones that are going to work, that don't work? What were those lessons that you learned?
Yeah, it's interesting, right? So just hearing from Ravi and Nate's point of view, I think as a PE owner, I think we have a little bit of a different angle to it, which is more like a financial lens to it too, because there are use cases that really work, but they don't make financial sense, right? Just to give an example, I have an insurance portfolio company, and underwriting is everybody talks about it, workflow that we can automate. When you look at the bottom of it, if they're spending $5 million on underwriting, great job, but like, what's the point of automating, right? So you're losing a lot more personalized hand touch, white glove service to an automated tool, with spending so much money, but there's no ROI to it, right? So one of the things that I think we constantly debate on is, what's the actual true impact here, and do we need to even focus on it, right? Another example for us is like, let's think about customer support, like in automate. But if it's not core to a business function, to a business, and it's not going to be the one that's differentiating for you, so do we want our CEOs to spend time, energy on it,
Yeah.
So I think a lot more prioritization that happens in our sense to a little bit higher level on where we should actually be focusing on. Even if AI is going to make an impact, should we even doing it, both from a financial sense, from a competition lens. So I think those are the questions that boils down. And I know a little bit, I think, Chad and Nate, like Ravi talked about it, we're also begin to focus on prioritization, because we have a short window to influence an organization, and we don't want AI to be a distraction, right? Because there are only so many things that we want to change in an organization. So with all that lens, more and more, what we have learned actually in this process is to be focused. We have many portfolio companies where we can do AI, and maybe there are use cases that actually work not as a horizontal, but like a very focused workflows. But there are a few companies where we think actually where there's a true value, there's a true competitive differentiation, there's a true timing that matters most, and having them starting there and getting the right alignment in the CEO leadership is where I think we see the unlock, right? So because we don't want to embark this journey and the rest of leadership not getting there. So
maybe let's, one question, I guess, open up to anyone of you, is we look at there's the business focus. You've talked about business problem, the customer, great. But now let's go to the engineering talent and the developer, right? What was the fit at that time? What was the learnings from, you had a development team, you got development teams already doing work, this drops. Any sort of perspectives in terms of how easy was it to pick up things? Was it difficult? Any sort of perspectives from the audience? From you guys, sorry.
I'm just volunteering Ravi because, he's the Chief Technology Officer, but happy to answer after him,
Thank you, Chai. So there's two different perspectives here, right? So one is when the real coding assistance tools really started taking off. For the first time in my career, and I've been around 25 years, engineering is no longer the bottleneck, right? Now you're creating a lot more code, right? And whether you're going in the right direction or not is a different question, but you can certainly get to an answer pretty quickly, right? And create work products. So that was exciting, but also that exciting was met with a little bit of either you can call it bitterness or skepticism, right? Especially with some of our like top tier folks. Well, I don't like the style of what this coding assistance, right, is putting out, right? Doesn't meet some of the standards or formats, right? Like design, aesthetics, you name it. So it took a little bit of maybe cajoling and convincing to say, yeah, maybe we are not writing for human consumption. Maybe this is going in the direction of maybe agentic consumption, where there's more agentic coding algorithms that need to understand, and maybe it doesn't need to look as pretty as long as there's documentation around. So there's things like that, the bridges that we needed to cross. I don't think we are ever out of it. We still have the dialogue and debate within the engineering teams. But one of the other things, the second perspective of all of this is, as I was saying earlier, for the first time in my career, right, no one can point at the engineering team, right, or half of me is not pointing at the other half and saying, right, engineering is slow. But what that meant was the bottleneck now moved to the left, right? How about UX, right? Can UX move fast now? Or product management, right? How do you vet an idea, right? The ways in which we've vet ideas, and we are always, again, as I was alluding to earlier, we always start with the customer. So a lot of customer interviews. We want to vet the idea. We want to build prototypes. When I say prototypes, this is wireframes, put in front of a customer, and that process usually took 6 to 8 weeks, right? Depending on the size of the idea. Well, guess what? In the new world, the experimentation, the prototyping, the cost of building something is near zero, right? So why do you have to put so many words around an idea? Just show it, right? Build it and show it. So we've been actively taking a look at just the same way we are talking to our customers and saying, hey, you need to start thinking about reimagining how work might flow, irrespective of whichever workflow that might be. It could be an anti-money laundering workflow or a loan origination workflow. We're also drinking the same Kool-Aid, so to speak, and saying or challenging ourselves to say, the way we are building products, it needs to change, right? Because what used to take 4 or 5 people in a garage 6 months to get to an idea or a demoable idea now takes a weekend, right? Or a couple weeks. So that, I think, is the biggest shift from our perspective, that we've been openly challenging and changing the overall process of developing products.
Yeah, we had a very similar amount of friction with the developers, even internally at AWS, with my team included. Very, very skeptical about the quality of things that were coming out, and it wasn't meeting our patterns and whatnot. And I took a different approach with our customers and even the team, talking to them about how to think about this. I said, really, the returns you're going to get are really going to be in the greenfield space, where you're looking to build something new, build a proof of concept. Let's use this as an enablement tool to understand, help us understand the customer's vision of what they're asking for, and build them real rough prototypes really quickly, and get buy-in that we could then down the road develop into, through our normal processors, and make it something that was more production ready. And in doing those exercises, we started pulling in some of our customers and doing the hackathon type programs and getting them excited about how quickly they could greenfield something, with the expectation that eventually the tooling would mature enough that we could actually build in the controls to have it follow the architectural patterns and standards that existed inside of individual companies and what they wanted to see done. And that's been the case. It's been developing that way and been quite good. But in doing that, it got the engineers, especially those that are typically the ones that lean in and want to learn new technologies, usually it's your senior guys, got very excited about where this could go and became ambassadors and advocates inside their own portfolio companies. And they're the ones that are driving, hey, we really need to think about this. We need to drive it more in our business. We need to be teaching my junior guys how to use this. They understood how to communicate with the tools, how to get the value out of it. So we've seen it really accelerate as the space is maturing. Yes. That we're seeing a lot more trust in the tools. And the thing I'm running into now with the friction point is that they're wondering about the architecture designs behind the code. Now they have something functioning. Is it done right? And I'm saying, well, does it matter if it works? And what if I get a bottleneck in my scaling on the cloud or whatever? Well, why aren't you just feeding that back into an agent to change either the architecture or change how it's being deployed and have it solve for it? Why do you care? If you're still delivering value to the customer quickly, is it really a problem? And so I'm challenging them to think about the way they're doing things. And I said, what you're going to really run into is that you're going to get so fast at doing things is that QA is going to become your bottleneck. Think about how you're going to start solving that problem now, because you're going to be producing so many new products, so many new revisions, so many new features that somebody's got to, besides having agents doing your smoke tests and verifying things, you still need to have human in the loop somewhere to make sure that the quality is in place. And that is the problem you need to be thinking about solving for. That's the next challenge you're going to have as you adopt these technologies.
I think I agree with all that. I think the question of talent, which I think we're trying to get to, is no, that was great. I was just coming back to it because I think all that's relevant.
You can disagree as much as you want. It's fine. It's fine.
Is the question, talent? I think there's still a lot of people out there who could put a prompt into whatever and create code and wouldn't know what the heck to do with it, right? We still have people out there that still think Python is a snake, right? Like they don't know what the heck to do with Python, right? And so I think there's that group of people, but there's also this group of people of technologists who are really deep in this who don't understand anything about value creation within a PE portco. So you kind of got that dichotomy at both ends of this. And so I do think that there's a lack of talent that's right for making the most out of generative AI within businesses, right? Like it's not just, oh, anybody off the street, just pull them up and we can turn them into coders and we can write a bunch of crappy code that senior devs want to look at and kick back to the junior devs. Like I think there is a gap, I think, quite frankly, in that talent. And oftentimes what it is you're seeing people that aren't your PhDs in data science that are the people you need. And they're not necessarily like the accountants from your business you need, but you kind of need somebody that has dual hats and that can really think about like value within a business and also can interpret and prompt an AI model to get things done. That's where we've got to adapt. All of our people infrastructure needs to adapt around that type of thinking.
I think one thing, one thing that I'd like to add to that, I totally agree. It does start from the top, right? You need to set the right tone, right? Because product managers, you need to know how to code. Right, I think somebody was saying it yesterday at the conference that the biggest lie that's being told everywhere is that there's going to be less coders and less coding. No, in fact, I think there's going to be more people that will be coding, more people that will be prompting, that have to know how to prompt. So if you as a leader of a business, right, especially in PE, because I think a lot of value, right, is up for grab, especially if you're a workflow company, right, and understanding, and we can go into all of that, but you as a leader need to start getting your toes wet, fingers in there, make sure that you understand the power of whether it's a coding assistance tool or, Lovable, you pick your favorite tool, right? But you have to understand and appreciate it and then push it down, right? And then you'll always find the grassroots champions, right? So that's when I think truly a cultural change will start to happen.
And one of the things that I found is really interesting as people have been moving forward with the tools and enabling the teams by just handing out a tool, they're expecting their employees to just know how to use it effectively. And nobody's really investing in the workforce and doing the training to get the most out of these LLM models. And I'd like to stop and make them think, like, do you ever, interact with your junior developers and some of your IT staff and ever think, wow, that's a really great communicator? I mean, are they the best communicators out there? Probably not. We all have a little bit of autism and don't know how to communicate with one another. Well, that's the fundamental skill you need to make these large language models do what needs to be done. You have to communicate your intent with your context to get something out of it. And we're just not teaching people that. We're giving them tools and expecting them to succeed. And what we're finding is that those senior devs and leaders that naturally work with junior devs and know how to communicate what tasks they want them to perform, do a great job working with the LLMs and getting them to do tasks and provide good output. But those junior devs, those people who haven't been put in leadership positions, don't know how to communicate effectively. They struggle with this. And it's not just that the IT people struggle with it. This is across the entire business. Everybody we want to enable to start doing these things needs to fundamentally have some understanding of how to communicate, how to task manage, how to work with other individuals. And we're just not doing that today. I think we're missing that as an enablement piece.
So we've talked a little bit about the then, right, when 3 years ago, which feels like 10 or more years, maybe each year has been dog years, right, dog years. And then we talked about some of the learnings. Let's go into the today, right, the now, and start with Jai and then get also Nate's perspective as well as we think about how private equity is thinking differently about AI. And then you and I were chatting a little bit about how you're thinking about diligence and a difference. Maybe you can sort of talk a little bit about what you're doing today from that perspective.
I think one big change from the last few years is there's a lot more clarity and emphasis on AI. I think it was more an optionality in discussions maybe in the last few years, and there are few people who used to ask, not everyone, but now it's a must, right? So just to give an idea, every time we actually go to investment committee, we need to actually give a one-pager both on the risk and the opportunity on the AI side, right? So it's a must. It's not an optional thing to have. And you need to be able to clearly defend, that you're not going to get disrupted in the next 5 years, right? Because in some way, if you take again a PE lens, I'm the exit is going to happen in the next 5-10 years. It's not going to happen in any time soon. So we are really talking about long forward risk, right? So even if there's a small risk here, it's going to amplify later. Well, the other thing I think interesting is, AI as a value creation lever always existed, right? And I think even before GenAI has come, like people talked about AI as a value creation lever, but it never was actually like, one of the standard toolkit to be used, right? So it was always like, oh, you know what, in one of those edge cases, we'll find some interesting data, we'll use them. But now it's becoming a more and more common practice to, say, what, let's think about it. But then it comes with challenges, Nate and I were chatting, looks like every time he does a due diligence, they ask him how much is the cost and, how much is the impact going to get, but we don't know it yet, always. But that's basically, the gap that, the folks are actually currently in, is trying to figure out how do you actually come with the right guesstimate, not an estimate, because you're trying to really forecast the future and trying to see how to get a balanced, VC view on this. And try to make sure that you set up well for success.
So I would totally agree with that. On the diligence question, it's interesting to see how it's evolved, because I think when we were asked, two plus years ago, we started getting asked questions around how do we diligence AI, and it was very much like a maturity and readiness question, right? How ready is this organization to adopt AI? I see the question very much now evolving into, and sorry, I guess I say the other thing is, it was how ready are they? And that was kind of like a back office question, right? It's like, do they have the right data? Do they have the right tech stack? Do they have the right people? Kind of a check the box kind of question. In diligence now, it is much more of an existential question. Like the primary, well, not primary, but one of the primary questions we get now is like risk. Is like, can two guys in a garage replicate this thing? And unfortunately, a lot of the time our answer is, yeah, probably. But you still have a product moat. You might have a data moat. You have a customer moat that can't be overcome. And so I think that's the big evolution I've seen is like, it's no longer an IT enterprise question of like, check the box, is this thing ready? It's a question of, well, what does the market look like? The commercial diligence, it's a operational question of like, to your point, cost takeout of call centers or engineering teams or whatever. It's a product question of like, in the market, how are we relative to our customers in terms of features? Like this AI question has grown and grown and grown and grown to where you're exactly right. Like every IC is asking about the disruptive risk of generative AI the same way. And I had another PE firm explain it this way, which is like, oddly enough, we're here at AWS, but they're like, you had to answer the question of Amazon and how it would disrupt any sort of consumer packaged good 15, 20 years ago, whatever. You had to answer that question to an IC. Like, you're going to buy a clothing brand, you're going to buy this, you're going to buy that. What happens if Amazon gets into this and disrupts this business? That question is now AI. It's like, what if AI can disrupt call centers, or it can disrupt, factory floors, or, the generation of manuals, or whatever that might be? Like, every IC is asking this question now, and it's very much more of a risk question, or it's evolving into a risk question and an opportunity modeling question than necessarily like a check-the-box maturity kind of diligence.
Yes, excellent. So when we think about, into Ravi and Chad, your perspectives, you guys are seeing multiple production. You had multiple successes in rolling things out, and if you look into this audience, right, you're going to have private equity executives, you're going to have, CTOs, CPOs, other executives within companies, and you're going to have people in the development community, right, different levels, right? What sort of lessons should they take in terms of components that made yours, when you look at the success, what resulted in that success, and therefore what should they be thinking about to improve the chance of their success within their companies and within their careers?
Yeah, I'll start. One of the things I think is key to success is really understanding, well, I guess there's more than one thing, there's several things. One is understanding that, the business problem you're trying to solve. So you're laser focused on, focusing on something that's impacting the business rather than the technology. And do I have the data in place today to support that initiative? So the companies I've really seen accelerate in every way are the ones that took approaches early on to build that data lakehouse architecture with their data, not for the sake of GenAI, but to enable every other part of the business to more quickly build their own dashboards, fish for what they need, make data-driven decisions at every level. The companies that lean into that data, whenever they look at generative AI for solutions, tend to have everything in place they need to accelerate the adoption of that and have really tremendous outcomes where they're able to do the complex things they want to talk about, have really low rates of hallucination, if at all, keep them down to something that's really acceptable. They already understand the scaling piece a little bit, so they don't run into those type of challenges. And they've already got a fundamental team that is developed enough, so they don't have that talent challenge. They're already thinking about data and how it's going to be used and planning for the future. And so that's fantastic as an initial thing. And if you don't have that, or it may be not perfect, I think the way you can move forward without kind of clipping the wings of your teams that want to accelerate adoption is as you analyze your use cases for generative AI and what you can do to accelerate some business outcomes, grab 2 or 3 of those, look to see if data is close to what you need to kind of go from that proof of concept where you've got small sample size of clean data to the production readiness. And if it's not there, just put a program, some governance in place just to accelerate that use case and start doing it piecemeal. Because what I see too often is that companies have realized they've got some data challenges, and they've stepped back and said, well, okay, we need to build strong data governance. We need to go do some data cleanup. And these are business problems, and it's not an IT problem. And so you've got to get all the different stakeholders involved to get your data clean. And it really slows down your rate of change and your progress. You just end up spending all of your time getting mired in data, and you see no value out of that because you're just basically putting governance and rigor around it. And everybody's like, well, why are we doing this? It sounds like a lot of work. But if you can just piecemeal it and know that your governance programs and stuff will adopt and be it's a constantly evolving, growing thing, and just focus on what needs to be done to accelerate your business, those companies tend to do quite well. I mean, in every way, you're trying to enable them and not clip wings, and they'll move forward and produce something of value. That's what I've been saying.
Yeah, I cannot agree more with you, Chad. I think as Yogi Berra would say, it's 90% culture and the other half is technology. Right? Look, I think, there's a lot of learnings. I think one of the things that comes along with trying to at least stay at pace with what's happening in AI, you tend to make a lot of mistakes, but again, mistakes is just a perception, right? You learn from those mistakes and then you course correct. One thing that I would add to everything that Chad said is hesitate away from big transformation projects in preparation for taking on AI, right? Just relax the rules, right? Governance is important, especially in a regulated sector, right? Make sure that you're not doing anything stupid, but fast-paced, right? How do you get that pace into the team so they can experiment, right? The other thing that I would say is AI as a magic wand is just being waved at everything, right? We see it in the space. And to Nate, what you were saying, we run into prospect meetings with regional banks, community banks, and they would often talk about somebody that's been around for 6 months, and they built an entire loan origination system, and they're gonna make it exactly like we want, right? These are the conversations that we'll have, and some of the things that get missed in the process, and sometimes we lose those deals, and we know that they're gonna come back because the last mile of software still exists, right? By that I mean, it's the service, it's the support, it's all the things that AI can do today anyway, right? So it's important to make sure that you're not over-indexing, right? And the third thing I'd say is, I was alluding to this earlier, right? Have an intricate understanding of your customers and the workflows. Because when anybody waves that magic wand of AI and that you can AI everything, well, which parts and why? What is the value that's being added, to the point that you were raising earlier too, right? What is the value that's being created here? And make sure that you have the wisdom to differentiate between the deterministic and indeterministic workflows, right? How does it improve the customer experience? Like, for example, if you get you're applying for a loan and you submitted the documents and by mistake submitted a 2023, let's call it a W-2, right? But you were looking for 24 W-2, you can have an AI assistant that's actually looking at it and then immediately responding back to you, so you're not waiting for the data analyst to come back the next day, right? That improves the customer experience, so do that, right? Because the interaction is indeterministic, right? You're learning from what's being exchange, right? So those are the types of things that I think it's important not to, wave the AI at everything and make sure that you understand where do you truly add value.
The one thing I was going to, and that's great, Rob, and I was going to chime in with something similar to that, is like, I think you emphasize the data piece, and like 100%, like people's data is not ready and there's a bunch of problems. And I'll say from like, we've done probably 100+ diligences in market for different PEs. And two of the, maybe not surprising, but maybe no one's surprised that mid-market PE portcos don't have good data. That's not a shock to anyone, right? That there's a lot of poor data out there in companies.
Even bigger ones.
Even bigger ones that don't have great data. But the other gap that I think people disregard sometimes is frankly that human infrastructure gap, that talent gap. And whether that be, we've got some people who are hiring PhDs and whatever, or hiring BI people and converting them into AI people, is like that talent gap, I think, is very real within a lot of the companies we've looked at. And like you think about it, Ravi, like the amount of talent you've brought in over the last couple of years, I feel like you guys have got a fantastic set of AI people that know how to do this the right way. And as we've diligenced companies, we see a lot that fall short in talent. Not just data that's a mess, but they don't have the right people who understand the true art of the possible and the art of the implemented. And I was talking with a portco literally a couple days ago that we did diligence on, and they said, yeah, we've scrapped half of our engineering team because we didn't have people who could actually deploy AI. And so I think that's the other thing that I don't think people are realizing, is that this is more of a people problem than they realize. Is integrating AI into their businesses is going to require a people change too.
Yeah, and just to add to that, when it comes to the people problem, there's really some psychology to this, believe it or not, and I think that exists in everywhere when it comes to transformations. But if you think of how to frame the problem, if we look back, I don't know if anybody's aware of this example or not, where you drop off somebody in the African wilderness and they're told to survive. You drop off a lion in this African wilderness and you drop off a zebra. They both have the same problem of surviving, but the way they look at the problem is fundamentally different. And when you take that same approach to AI and you've mandated where potentially your teams can't hire anybody new, they've got to try and solve this problem in an agentic or an AI approach, that has a real negative connotation. They feel like they're being mandated and under friction. But if you say, hey, I want you to pretend you're a startup, build a little tiger team and see what you can get done over here. It's the same thing you're doing to them. You're not letting them hire new staff, but you're making them, it makes people more excited to have that reframing of the problem, that now you're in this startup mode and we want to see what you're capable of with this little tiny team. People get energized by that and will go do something fun. Like, hey, the rules are off. Just go play. This is now greenfield for you as a new team. Go do it, because this is what you'd be forced to do if it was a startup. Have at it. And people somehow, the psychology thing, magically get bought in and will start doing this and move forward. And those people become your ambassadors and advocates as you move forward.
And then we'll move to questions for the audience in a moment. Yep.
Do you want to go?
Yeah, you can share.
Yeah, no, I was going to build on what you were saying, Chad. I think people do gravitate towards that, siloed startup, go create, right? I'll give you a challenge and just go after it. Like, we had this product, it's a pretty squeaky product, I'm not going to name it, that's been around for multiple years. And every single time, I've been with the company for about 4 years, every single time a conversation came about rebuilding it, it was 12 to 18 months. So it was always in the distant future. So middle of this year, somewhere around July or August, we picked like a small group of people, like literally 4 or 5 people, including the product manager and the UX person, and say, hey, just go, I'm going to give you 2 weeks, right? And if it falls on its face, it's totally okay. Just go try to rebuild the whole thing in 2 weeks. And everybody looked at me and saying, right, everybody that's supporting it, right, you guys are out of your mind, right, that's not going to happen. I said, okay, no, just go try it, right? Go to a location, sit down and do this. Now, they failed, right? We didn't rebuild the whole product. They got about 50% of the way, 50%, right? And we are releasing the product, right, in January. And this was back in August, right? So the art of the possible, sometimes we hold ourselves back, right? So just create the environment where people can actually go and just, again, it's cliched, but give them the right to fail, right? And give them the right tools, and they will deliver.
Yes.
Just one small thing, from an investor vantage point of view, honestly, we have seen it's not data. it's not actually tech team or talent. It's broad leadership alignment, right? So the most successful programs you've seen is they had a crappy data, but the leadership was aligned. They made it happen, right? So they made it to the challenges. They showed the perseverance, and it's a recurring pattern we've seen. Like every time I've seen a success, honestly, it falls down to leadership alignment, right? So in fact, our prioritization starts with leadership alignment now. So we don't actually engage, even if the best idea in the world, best product in the world, that we don't want to do it if the leader is not aligned, right? So, and it sounds a little bit different because we're seeing it from a different vantage point of view, but that's the single most success factor we've seen.
Excellent, excellent. So I want to turn it over to the audience for any and all questions. Someone can if you want to put your hand up.
Hi there. And since you've been covering like all the implementation, I was wondering if you all could touch on how you are securing AI, because that has been a challenge for our organization. Not just making sure people don't put it in the wrong places, like put good data out in places they shouldn't be putting it, but also if people have access to data and AI, somebody gets into their system, and they get into that AI, they can extract a lot of data very quickly. Have you worked on anything like that with your organizations?
No.
Yeah. See, I think just to be very honest, I don't think people have figured it out, right? So, in fact, we just had a conversation yesterday with all our portfolio CTOs, and we've been discussing about how they're thinking about it. Honestly, there's nobody had a clear answer. But couple of friends, right? I think we are noticing one, I think it's security comes in different lenses. It starts even thinking about, from your data, you do even have usage policies for this data. People take it for granted in many cases that we are using this, especially in the regulated industry. So before even thinking about security of this, how do you use this data? Do you want to use this data? The second step that is actually going to do is when you're offering services, right? So I'm sure we're all creating reports, we're creating chatbots. They're going to actually have their own certain set of quality issues and challenges there. So how are you thinking about from that angle? How are you trying to be thoughtful there? But to your core question on security, I think it's a good question, and I think people are trying to really think about from a validation, guardrails that you want to keep inside your models when you're actually throwing the outputs back. How are you trying to actually have a telemetry set up to actually monitor everything that's being done? How are you trying to refresh the output? How are you trying to make sure the model refreshes are being thought through, and there is a sufficient test harness built into it so that you are validating everything that goes through. So there's a lot of technical problems to it, but I just want to underlie the fact that there are fundamental questions that people have really not solved about data and providing services there. I think it's an open topic, and people are constantly thinking about it.
Yeah, I would say it's an open topic too. I mean, for those of you that may not be aware why we care so much in some of these things, especially when we are first turning things loose, like Q against your file servers and using it internally to source data. One of the early challenges that would come up was, should everybody have access to this data? Well, it's not really that big of a deal. It seems like it's okay. They already got access to it from a file system level. We don't really have it well aggregated. So just go with it. I said, wait, step back for a second. Have you ever wondered, looking at Department of Defense and government data, why something that gets to be unclassified, why it was ever classified to begin with? It seems like a mundane piece of data. I said, the reason that is because you take enough of those mundane pieces of data, somebody who's really clever could get a material view of something that's going on. And that can happen with your file servers' internal data sets as well, when something we don't want. So early on, it was that data segregation piece, making sure data was segregated and your AI tools could only access certain things, or people could only go down certain knowledge paths with those tools. Now, not to sound like an AWS sales pitch, but we are encouraging a defense in-depth approach using the Bedrock guardrails and tools and the agent core policies. That gives you a lot more granular control than you've had before and maybe have anywhere else. But yes, this is still something that's developing as we move forward, and it'll continue to develop, and eventually we'll get there where everything feels nice and tight and tidy, but there's still work to be done, for sure. So it hasn't been solved yet.
Over there, we got a question over here.
My question revolves around sanctioning the AI project. So in some organizations, they expect you to win. They expect you to succeed. So what are your thought processes when you're trying to sanction an AI project? Do you go for the quick wins? Do you go for the big, project and, want to execute everything at once? I just want to know.
Yeah.
Question.
For me, whenever I'm looking at a project, this is all about building trust with your stakeholders. So I'm going for those quick wins and clear paths to victory so that I can build both initiative, muscle memory, and get the continued investment that I want to move forward with those bigger projects. So I'd always start with something that's achievable and something that's quick and move forward with it and showcase it to the team because you want people to get excited. You want broader adoption. If you have negative, I'll call them failures, which are fine, but if you have a bunch of failures or you take on something that's too big to achieve or you've hyped it up a lot and it doesn't work, you start creating almost like this cancer inside the business where they think it's not going to work. And so we run into that challenge with transformation initiatives in general, that you've got these kind of transformation antibodies that don't want to move. And if you give them, ammo and give them data where they can say, well, this failed, this failed, this failed, they'll talk amongst themselves and amongst other people and start poisoning the well. So you've really got to have a couple of those good wins up front in order to build that momentum and kind of keep the naysayers at bay. So I would go with that approach.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And it's also a capability question, right? So you're also proving that you can actually build it and deliver value. So it just creates a nice credibility factor there.
And I think Ravi hit it. It's like, to me, this question of failure, some people here might know about the Prompt 100 program AWS did, where you're doing POCs in 2, 4, 6 weeks or something.
Rapid.
This is even more rapid now. The way we work with portcos now is like a day. We've done some where it's 24 hours. Sometimes it's an afternoon. The point is, this failure should not be a couple of months exercise. And as Ravi described, put 2 guys and say, go to Miami for a couple of days and see if it works. That's what I think we need to reframe the conversation as. If it's AI prototyping, it's you should be able to fail really fast and really inexpensively. But
I think there's also a piece, I think, to go back to comments you guys said about having business alignment. Yeah. There has to be, you can't just assume success. Yes. You've got to allow things to fail and learn from that failure. Otherwise,
if your leadership is not, and this is where I think I keep reinforcing it, if your leadership is not aware of how to do an AI program, then we are set up for failure, right? Because they need to know that it takes time. It takes perseverance. They have to fail a few times. There's a journey to it, right? So, and it sounds fascinating, but, the single most thing is leadership training on the business side, not on the tech side. Yeah. On AI is actually the single most thing, and then getting them aligned. On your targeted question, right? So I think actually it's an and, right? I would not take an effort to take small ideas because sometimes, it slowly gets to a very is this high value ROI? Do you want to do this? So I would almost think about 2-pronged approach where you try to get some quick wins and get some excitement, but in parallel have big, bold ideas. And maybe what we need to do is, how do you eat your elephant? How do you break the big, bold ideas into small pieces to chat point to show progress, I think is where the unlock is. But if you don't focus on the big, bold ideas, wait for it, your CEO is any leadership is going to call in 3 months and say, let's reprioritize this,
Yeah, and just one other thing. I don't want it to come across as treat it like a pass-fail, just look for the ones that you know are going to succeed. Frame this all as experimentation. That's really what this is. You want to encourage people to experiment. They do need to have room to fail, but don't cast it in that. This is a pass-fail type scenario.
Well, as we're coming to the end of this session, first of all, I'd like to thank the panelists, Chai, Ravi, Chad, Nate, for your perspectives. I'd like to thank the audience for spending time with us. We're just starting. It's been 3 years, and we're just starting to see things in production effectively, but there's so much more to go. We haven't even started talking about the impact of agents and everything else that's coming around. We're going to be in this journey for a long time. There's a lot to do, a lot to learn collectively. So look forward to going on this journey with the rest of you. Thank you for your time. Thanks to the audience. Thank you.